What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you may listen. Apple, Spotify, as well as if you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button. Leave a comment below in the comment section. Make sure you subscribe to the page as well. Also, we are live, all of our content all week long on AMP, Amazon AMP. Make sure you download the Amazon AMP app. Very, very easy to do. Can't recommend it enough. A lot coming up. We're going to do 5 big storylines headed into OTAs because after next week, all the rookie mini camps will be banged out and we'll just be full on going with coaches and players on the field in shorts and t-shirts, but it's what happens in the spring. And I'm excited. Got my brain working and things I want to dive into all around the league and the 5 things that I think are by far the most intriguing as we kind of head in to the offseason really ramps up now that the draft is over. But before we dive into football, can I tell you about my friends and the official ticketing app of this show, 3 and Out? That is Gametime. I need you to download the Gametime app. Just go to your app store, download the Gametime app. And when you do, if you want to go to a basketball game, a baseball game, a football game in the fall, obviously concerts, comedy shows, you name it, they got you covered. Just use the promo code JOHN, John. Went to an NBA playoff game last week. It was awesome, and I did it because my friends at Gametime. I know a lot of you people have used it. Obviously, it's why they're the presenting sponsor of the show, but appreciate everyone that has. Can't recommend them enough. Very easy to use. Download the Gametime app, promo code JOHN, and go to an event. Have a good time, and do it on me with a little discount. Let's dive into the 5 big storylines for OTAs. I have a love-hate relationship with OTAs, having gone to many for, well over a decade. They're fun in the sense to just, kind of get you outside. It's kind of like the football version of golf. Just get you some sun, get you a little sweat. When you work in the league, it's a very positive time. It's very light-hearted, I would say, from a work week standpoint relative to what the fall is. Obviously, if you turn on your television, you see all these guys going to hockey games, basketball games, NBA, baseball game, whatever. These guys are out and about having a good time all over the country. You get new players on your team. It's just a very, very positive time in every building, whether you're an elite team like, the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Eagles, whatever, or you're a shitty team, right? Because you get to break out some of the new toys. You may have new coaches. The only downfall really is injuries. And obviously an injury at this point in time of the year is typically non-contact. And so it tends to be pretty devastating, right? Other than that, especially if you have a new quarterback, it's just fun. Listen, I've been lucky enough to be able to go to these practices. They're not open to the public like the fall is during training camp, but it's very, very light. It's why I never really support some of these guys bitching and moaning that don't show up. Now, I completely understand if you have a specific training regimen and, certain players, OTAs. If you tell me Tyreek Hill doesn't come to OTAs or Trent Williams, I don't care. But some of these players, when they act like it's really difficult, maybe it was back in the day. But since I've been around it, and definitely in 2023, it's the country club version of football. And it's just a good time to be around your teammates, develop some chemistry. And I do think that bleeds into the season. Guys like each other, really get to know each other. This is when, basic things like us normal human beings, which ultimately football players are, barbecues, weekend drinking events, going to games. It's just a good time. So let's start number 1. It's got to be the rookie quarterbacks, right? Because we had 3 guys go in the top 4. And really the most polarizing one who fell to the second round is at a place where he's probably going to play too. But when the first 2 quarterbacks that were picked, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, these guys are going to be the starting quarterbacks for their team week 1. I do not care what their coaches are saying right now. Oh, they're going to start with the 2s. They got to work their way up. They got to CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, if they do not get injured, will be the starting quarterbacks come week 1. If they're not, we got a major problem. Both of them, multiple-year starters of basically the best 2 programs in the country. Georgia, you're included too. So two of the best three programs in the country. Michigan's like, we beat them twice. I know. Okay. Two of the top four programs in the country. You know what I mean? So these guys have played a lot of football, had a ton of success, both been in the playoffs, both, made big plays when it mattered most. There is absolutely no reason. Not every quarterback is the same, but these two guys, plug and play starters. Now, are they going to be good? I don't know. I would bet on Bryce Young. I think a lot of people are, question how high CJ's ceiling is. I'm intrigued to watch because that game against Georgia made me change my tune. Clearly, the Texans aren't good, but both these guys starter week one. The third guy, Anthony Richardson's a little interesting because in theory, he's a complete redshirt guy, right? Well, I saw some quotes coming out of Indianapolis, some people that cover the team, like, I would not be shocked at all if the guy plays. One thing with Trey Lance a couple years ago, and I think there are some parallels in the sense of these physical freaks, even though I think Anthony Richardson is in a complete different level than Trey, much faster, much more natural thrower of the football, but he hadn't played a lot of football. I think 13 career starts. So the only way you can improve is by playing. I mean, you can improve in practice and the mental reps and learn to become a pro, but that can only take you so far. You have to play in the games, right? And the hard part about football is like, you can't take live BP. You can't just play a full-on 5-on-5 game in the NFL like you can in the NBA, right, in the offseason. The only time to play football is in preseason games and regular season games. It's the only time real games happen because in practice, they do not, and most of these places come even close to replicating what we see on the field. I looked at their quarterback depth chart, and it's Ellinger from last year, right? They drafted him a couple years ago from Texas, and Gardner Minshew. So in theory, you could start Gardner Minshew to start the season and with a plan to kind of slowly integrate him as the year goes, which I would say is very possible. That's probably what I would bet on, but I would say there's a 50-50 chance where they just say, screw it. Let's just go with the 4th overall pick. And as we say at Cal Poly, learn by doing, figuring out on the go, and almost be okay with this could be a rocky year, a little like Josh Allen's rookie year, and we're just going to figure it out on the fly, and we're cool with it. That's, I think that's obviously a very, distinct possibility. Now, Will Levis, the last quarterback I want to talk to, is not going to beat out Ryan Tannehill. That's not possible. But Ryan Tannehill is hanging by a thread. And two things are going against Ryan Tannehill. One, his team is not that good. So there is a decent chance that they are not going to be very competitive this year, which their weapons look around beside Henry. It doesn't look like, A.J. Brown ain't walking through that door. So it could be a really slow start for him individually. So if the team's not playing well and he's not playing well, especially number-wise, I think it's very, very possible. And I know people that cover the team have written about it. I mean, it's Captain Obvious. Will Levis is probably starting games this year. Start the season as the backup quarterback, and then who knows? I mean, if they got off to like a 1-5 start, you could insert him pretty easily. Now, if they're kind of, 3-3 and, 5-6, maybe it's a little more difficult. But if you're them, don't you want to see what this guy has? Like, Ryan Tannehill is not going to be around. So you might as well just transition sooner the better so you can see if Levis can play. But the way I look at it, Bryce CJ starters day one, Anthony Richardson more of a coin flip, just kind of depending on internally how they view their team. And if they're cool with, I don't want to say tanking the season, but just taking, you would take some early lumps more than likely with Anthony Richardson, playing. That first couple of months could be pretty ugly, but it could really benefit them, not just the second half of the season, but in like 3 years when they go, all those reps Anthony Richardson got as a rookie when everyone thought he sucked is the reason now he's playing really, really well. And Will Levis, I'd put his over-under game started this year at about 7 or 8. Number 2, also stick with the quarterback theme. Trey Lance versus Sam Darnold. Because Trey Lance is battling to be the 49ers' backup quarterback. That's where 2 years removed from being the 3rd overall pick and them trading multiple ones on top of going from 12 to 3. Trey Lance is now in a quarterback competition with Sam Darnold. And you know what? He's got an uphill battle because the 49ers have been telling everyone, because they believe this, that Sam Darnold's really good. And they keep hammering that, like, you look at those last 6 games for Sam Darnold, what they saw was just a competent coaching staff, and the team had kind of figured it out. He played pretty well. Kyle Shanahan already liked Sam Darnold in years past, and they thought about trading for him when he was traded, when the Panthers ultimately traded for him. Like that was a 49er option. But they were sniffing around Stafford, and then the Deshaun Watson thing happened, and then they just, they just kind of got lost in the shuffle. But this is a guy they've had their eyes on. Matt Maiocco, buddy of mine, has covered the 49ers since I was in like junior high. Knows everyone in that building very, very well. He just said on a radio show that Sam Darnold might be the best thrower of the football the 49ers have ever had. Not currently have ever had. Now, what makes that unique is you're like, Matt, Joe Montana, Steve Young. If I was going to defend Maiocco, and Maiocco knows football, he's seen it all. Super Bowl teams, 2-win teams, from Kaepernick to Steve Young to Garcia to Alex Smith to Jimmy Garoppolo. Matt Maiocco has a lot of scouting experience watching the 49ers and watching good coaches and bad coaches. Joe Montana, ironically, who's most would consider the second best quarterback of all time, was not the most talented quarterback of all time. Like he did not have John Elway or Tom Brady or Dan Marino's arm, right? But again, he was an elite all-time great player, but it wasn't because of arm strength. And Steve Young, who I would say had a slightly better arm than Montana, also not known for having a hose. But if you do go back and watch the YouTube, I think Steve Young has a better arm than you think. Both those guys kind of hung their hat on accuracy, instincts, and athleticism. Obviously, Steve was an elite athlete. Joe, sneaky. You watch that documentary. Joe could move now. Joe was a much better athlete than even I realized. And something that all those West Coast offensive guys that went on, the Holmgrens, the Andy Reeds, they always liked their quarterback to be able to move. And those guys, they hung their hat more on that type stuff than just pure throwing a Dan Marino 200-mile-an-hour fastball. But I would say Kaepernick had the best arm in 49er history. Now, he had no touch, and he had no ability to throw a changeup like Steve Young and Joe Montana, but just best pure arm talent the 49ers ever had. It's not even close. I mean, Kaepernick, you see some of these videos that come out about draft time of Will Levis from his knees, throwing it over 3 lakes, or Anthony Richardson hitting the scoreboard in the practice facility. Colin could do that shit with his eyes closed and asleep. He just would also hit the trainer on the sideline when they were attending to someone on the bench because he did not know where the ball was going. But I think ultimately what Matt is saying, 49ers like this guy a lot. And every time I look up at a Warriors game, you know who's there with McCaffrey and Kittle and the boys? Sam Darnold. You know who's not there? Trey Lance. Now, I'm not trying to say that's everything because clearly Christian knows him from their time in Carolina, but it is a little weird. I get a lot of DMs is like, what, is Trey not invited? And I think the simple answer is no, not really. It doesn't feel like it. I mean, sure doesn't seem like it. He was last year when they tried to, kind of force him into the starting role. And then by about mid-training camp, the players were rumbling behind the scenes. This ain't going to work. So it's not just one thing with the 49ers. When the front office thinks something, usually their star players think it too. Why? Because they're all kind of in cahoots together. The 49ers are not run like the Patriots forever with Bill, where it's like just what Bill wants to do. I'm not saying Kyle won't do cutthroat things. I mean, they traded DeForest Buckner. But for the most part, the reason they re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo, all the players were grumbling. And I'm not talking every player. I'm talking the star group of players, right? It's pretty easy to figure out which ones because they didn't think he was good enough. So if they're thinking that, Kyle's thinking that, I would be stunned if Trey Lance beats out Sam Darnold. And when he doesn't, I mean, I think if Brock Purdy's a starter, and it turns out to be healthy, and they'll just roll with Brock Purdy and Sam Darnold and trade Trey Lance, I would guess around before week 1. Number 3, Bill Belichick, Mac Jones. This is a relationship that got weird, and it got weird fast. The one thing that always happened in New England forever is when Bill was pissed off about something or when Bill wanted something to change, it changed. Why? He would trade you. He would cut you. He would not resign you. It didn't matter how good of friends you were with Tom. Welker, Logan Mankins, all these guys that Tom loved, he said goodbye to. Obviously, all these great players that signed these, deals for cheap and would win, he would let them go as well, right? He would only buy low and sell high. The Mac Jones thing is interesting, right? Because you draft a guy 15th overall, you're kind of stuck with him for a couple years. And forever, Bill could publicly blast anybody, could make it be known the way he feels. It's a little different with the quarterback position. And it's pretty clear through the different leaks that Bill was not super happy with Mac. But one thing that's changed a little bit? Like, this ain't the Tom Brady Patriots. Not everyone just keeps their mouth shut. Pretty clear that Mac Jones wasn't happy with Bill. And if you're going to defend Mac Jones, you go, well, Bill, you gave him, a defensive fucking coordinator to call his offensive plays and a special teams coach to coach him at quarterback. And it was as ugly as it could have been. It was a disaster. And just look at your team. You don't have many, great offensive skill guys. So it'd be one thing if Mac Jones, who had an awful season, was terrible. But even beside, he got injured, but the eye test was clear. This guy was playing low-level football. And the one thing I always thought about Mac Jones, if he was ever going to maximize his potential, he was ultimately going to be, I would say, a Jimmy Garoppolo, poor man's Kirk Cousins, kind of in that vein. Well, he throws a lot of interceptions. He throws the ball to the team a lot, to the other team a lot, because he doesn't really play within his skill set. He makes moronic decisions. Now, you can say offense was really poorly run because of the offensive coordinator. No one's going to argue with you. But ultimately, when you drop back and there's a DB, in front of your offensive player and you throw it right to him, I can't totally put that on the coach. So to me, they both take blame last year for being a disaster. The one thing, though, and listen, I can relate in the sense of I struggled with my emotions, I would say all up until probably 3 or 4 years ago. I've really got control of it, meaning my outbursts of temper and anger. I struggled to control it. So I'd be a hypocrite to say that if I was in Mac Jones' shoes, I would have just been the ultimate pro and not freak the what out as he did all year. Now, I give you a pass to get super mad once in a while, but he was doing it over and over and over again. And it's like, bro, you ain't Tom Brady. And that's ultimately the position. Like, you technically didn't follow Tom because Cam did, but you kind of did. I mean, this is the highest draft pick Bill's ever put on a quarterback. I'm not thinking that Bill thought you were going to be Tom Brady, but they thought you were going to be a longtime starting quarterback and could help them go to the playoffs every year. And the way you played, last year, this team would have no shot to go to the playoffs. Now, I just don't think they're good enough. Though, Bill hires a real offensive coordinator, a guy that just knows Mac, though he never coached him, came when Mac left. But, one of the stories was Mac Jones helped teach him the Alabama offense. I mean, they know each other. And Bill is a real coach. No matter how much the media and former players think he's the village idiot, not a good general manager. And he's a great example why the overwhelming majority of coaches have no business picking the players or deciding when to do trades. They should have influence, but most coaches are too close to the sun and they're way too emotional. And their patience, football-wise, is just too short sometimes. And then they regret it later on. You almost have to put them out of the driver's seat and put them into the passenger seat. Well, he got in the driver's seat and he was a disaster, right? But he can coach. And it's why the Texans were, always competing to go to the playoffs. He goes to Alabama and we're awesome with Bryce Young. He's going to go to the Patriots and be an enormous upgrade. Now, I think a lot like Josh McDaniels, the one thing I would imagine, it was harder for Mac as a rookie to do anything, right? He kind of had to shut his mouth. Well, the second year as a starter probably felt more empowered, rightfully so. This third year, kind of been humbled a little bit because there's buzz that the owner likes Bailey Zappi. Bailey Zappi, he had some good moments, had some bad moments when he played last year, but there's another guy on the team that has now played, and they've had some success with. The other thing, if you're Bill O'Brien, I think there are zero you-know-what's given, because why does he give? He's just trying to win. If he gets the Patriots offense doing well, he'll be a head coach in the NFL again. That's going to happen if they have success. And when you look at their offensive roster, their run game is going to be fine. It always is. You know their defense is pretty good. The question is the passing game, right? I mean, you're talking about Devontae Parker. You're talking about Kendrick Bourne. Like they signed Juju Smith and Gesicki. You know, not terrible, but relative to the rest of the division, not even close. So I just think there's a lot of pressure. I don't think we know Belichick won't, but I don't think Bill O'Brien's going to put up with that, him freaking out on the sideline, screaming about what plays to call like he did last year. So that's something to monitor. And that relationship this offseason, I think Bill, during either right before the draft or during the draft, one of the nights, kind of changed his tune a little bit because he has to put out there he kind of believes in Mac because he needs him, at least if Mac's capable of playing. If he's not, they'll just pivot, I would imagine, pretty quickly this season to Bailey Zappi because Mike Lombardi talks about this a lot on the podcast, like how unfair it is that Bill, with all this success, and we're all questioning, like, should he lose his job when, you know, guys like John Harbaugh haven't won a meaningful game in like a decade, but it's like, oh, just on easy street, right? And I do, like, I get it. No one's acting like Bill Belichick is an idiot, right? Or deserves to lose his job because of his resume. But it is based on, like, yeah, you know, he's 71 years old. They got not much hope moving forward at this season's a disaster. And maybe the owner is like, you know, we've had two and a half decades here. We've all made a lot of money. Maybe it's just time for a divorce. Sometimes it's inevitable, professionally, personally. And that's where it feels. If Bill Belichick, let's say they win 6 games and I don't think they would fire him. It'd probably be a mutual departation. Now, maybe Bill is, you know, so petty and old school that he would be like, you know, fire me. I refuse to let you act like this is mutual. But, like, we're all saying that it would be because of, like, it's just time. Like, it's just time for a change. They wouldn't be able to upgrade. 99.9% the guy they would get after would be dramatically worse. Why? Because that guy's not Bill Belichick. But I don't think it's that crazy, right? Like, is Bill Belichick way better football coach than John Harbaugh or Ron Rivera or all these other coaches that probably should be on the hot seat? Of course. Mike McCarthy. But that's not this situation. This situation's about a long marriage, the ups and the downs, and now Brady leaves, and there's this whole, and Bill has unlimited power. You're paying a guy $20 million. Like, you don't just get to make, Bill Belichick doesn't own the team. You don't just get to make $20 million a year and not make the playoffs forever. That's not the way the world works, especially in this industry. So there's just a lot of pressure. You're talking about a lot of pressure. Number 4, Jordan Love. We've talked a lot about Aaron Rodgers, who took the boys, all the Packers, back to the Kentucky Derby, where I saw horses were dropping like flies. They had to kill like 3 horses this week because, you know, some major injuries. When you get an injury, you know, in football, you just go to the knee doctor, right? You just go get your shoulder worked on. In horse racing, you just take that horse to the barn. Bye-bye, horsey. You know, so it looked like Aaron Rodgers and Devontae and the boys were all back together having a good time. And we've talked about a lot of Aaron Rodgers. But what about Jordan Love? Because this offseason, it's all his. He is the guy, all the reps. I looked it up because I was like, how many passes has he actually thrown in his career? He has attempted 83 passes. I mean, there have been games when some quarterbacks in the NFL have attempted like 60-plus passes, right? I mean, how many passes did Tom Brady have in that playoff game? Wasn't it like 65 pass attempts? Maybe it was high 50s, but 83 career passes. Now, he's got this extension, so he's got a little breathing room. They got a young team. It's all him. And I do think we underestimate, you never want to be the guy that replaces the guy, right? They always say you want to be the guy that replaces the guy that replaced the guy. You don't want to be the person that replaced Nick Saban. That is an impossible job. You don't want to be the guy that replaces Bill Belichick. Good freaking luck. I don't care if they won 3 games this year. You got the number 1 pick. Like, that is not an easy guy to replace. You know, ultimately, Cam Newton, it was unique when he replaced Tom Brady, right? Andrew Luck replaced Peyton Manning, and that was not easy shoes, and he delivered right away. Ultimately, like, Jordan Love is replacing the best player in franchise history. And this is a franchise that on their Mount Rushmore is like Brett Favre and Vince Lombardi. one of our most famous franchises in all of professional sports. This is a team that has, for being this small, tiny little market team, an enormous fan base. Their games rate heavily. And a huge reason is because the last 30 years, these two-star quarterbacks, they play in they're massive brand. I just think, and they're going to downplay it. And like I've said, they're going to rely on the running game, and they have a scheme that's created for that. A lot of easy passes in theory are built into it with the play action game, the boots to get a guy just basic, easy layup completions. But a lot of moving parts with this franchise, depending on a lot of young people. It'd be one thing if Jordan Love was taken over and Lazard was still on the team. Devontae Adams had never got traded. And they just had some more core people, at the skill positions. But you're talking about second-year and first-year wide receivers, first-year tight ends. They do have a stable of veteran running backs and some accomplished offensive linemen. But this is a very, very young offense. And a coach who now has had a lot of success, but it was all with Rodgers. It's the first time him kind of in the deep end now without his floaties. Aaron Rodgers is one of the great all-time floaties of all time, right? Won back-to-back MVPs. And LaFleur gets credit for that. LaFleur was taught by and around some genius offensive play callers, some genius, a guy that created a scheme, right? So I'm not talking Kyle, I'm talking his dad. But I think the pressure on this franchise, there's also kind of this yin and yang in a situation like this where you're kind of always looking over the fence. Like, what's he doing over there? And we saw it immediately with Tom and Bill Belichick. You compare the two against each other. Fair or not. And it's really not, because they're two separate situations. If the Packers went 8-9 this year and Jordan Love was solid and you could see the future, it would be very, very successful. Anything less than a wild card berth for the New York Jets is a gigantic letdown. I mean, I don't want to go as far to say, but borderline disaster. But they're going to be compared every single week. If Jordan Love's good and Aaron Rodgers bad, or vice versa, it's going to be the talking point. They are directly correlated, that they are connected at the hip when we talk about the two players. And not that Jordan Love has to play like Aaron Rodgers. I've said it before. The chances that the best case scenario for Jordan Love, if I told Packer fans right now, he's like 75% of what Aaron Rodgers, they all would sell their soul for that. More than likely, he's like 20% and just not a good player. That's what history would show us. So fascinated here's the thing. And I've seen it when Trey Lance became the starter. And it's different he redshirted a year. Every single practice, completion percentage. How many balls hit the ground, how many balls were overthrown, how many good passes. It is a daily covered story about practice passes. Aaron Rodgers has not had that happen to him for a decade and a half. No one cared about an individual pass in practice. No one was tweeting out these last 10 years. Third day of training camp, Aaron Rodgers went 17 of 20. Like that, it didn't matter because we all knew it wasn't relevant. Same thing with Brady. Same thing now with Mahomes. Some of his sweet passes from a training camp practice get tweeted out, but no one is taking inventory on every single pass. That's what's going to happen. I've seen it firsthand, and it's intense when it goes the wrong way. When I worked with the Eagles, we got rid of Dave Akers and brought in a rookie kicker, and it was a disaster immediately. But every single day when that guy went out there, Alex Henry, kicker from Nebraska, every kick he had was charted. And every reporter was, at the time, I don't think Twitter was as big, but newspapers, the blogs. 49ers just drafted a kicker this year, Jake Moody. Every single time that guy kicks in practice, it's going to be a story, good or bad. It's no different with Bryce and Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud. Like, their practices are treated, fairly or not, like a game by the people watching. And we all get to find out the numbers at the end of practice. And I think that's the way just Jordan Love's going to be treated. Like when he has a training camp practice that's like 8 of 20, it's like, oh, Jordan Love have it? Is he inaccurate? Now it also goes the other way. Jordan Love was unreal today, 14 of 16. Now, he's judged in the games, clearly, but you got to get there first. And it starts in OTAs. Some of these practices are open to the media. The mandatory OTAs, all those practices are open to the media. Now, I mean, the ones I've been going to, sometimes Kyle, calls practice after 30 minutes and they go to a swim party. So I'm not saying all these practice, but once you get to training camp and those pads come on, that becomes serious football. And we're not that far away. But I think when you factor in the pressure on this guy, I would imagine the Packers have a pretty serious OTA session. Like there's no just like canceling random practices to get deep breaths because they got to get this guy reps. They got to get this guy ready for the season. Whether I believe it or you believe it, the Packers are trying to go back to the playoffs this year with this guy and look like geniuses. You better believe that Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur want to be talked about like, fuck. I mean, these guys, what a genius move. Because if this guy is good, I don't mean he's got to be great. If he's just good, we're at the end of the year, like, was Jordan Love the 11th best quarterback in the NFL? They will immediately get long-term extensions, and we'll all have to anoint them. Like that would be an incredible pivot. And last but not least, a little bit of a wild card here. There was a story last week that Tom Brady is on the fence about quitting at Fox. Obviously, he hasn't even started yet. But, and a lot of people in media circles have been like, is Tom Brady really going to call games? And I've always said, like, I assume he was. I don't know why. I never looked at it like I never thought someone was throwing a curveball at me. I thought Tom signed this because he was like, yeah, I'll retire, take a deep breath, and I'll call some games. It's easy. I'll fly in private, do some Zoom meetings. It's not like I'm in these cities for 3 out of my 7 days a week. Watch a little film, keep me in the loop. All the coaches will talk to me. It won't be that hard. I've always been hesitant that, like, there's two Toms. There's corporate Tom, which is the majority of the time we hear. And then there's Tom, like he was on his documentary on the ESPN Plus about the Patriot Dynasty, where he was swearing, where he was just kind of being the guy at the locker room, the guy that is in the locker room with his teammates, who just clearly feels like it just resonates with people. And I was like, I don't know if we're a lock to get the cool Tom. We might get the corporate Tom. And so I always question, like, is he he's not, to me, a can't miss. Like, he's just not. To me, a can't miss broadcaster, if you gave him a mic, would be Phillip Rivers. I think Phillip Rivers would be elite. He'd be awesome. Like, Tony Romo has his moments, and Tony Romo has some moments where he's, kind of cheesy. I think Phillip Rivers would be sweet. To me, Tom, he's definitely not Drew Brees. Like, to me, Drew is like, I just don't really, no chance. I bet against that one immediately. Tom, to me, I'd give like a 50-50 chance. There's a chance he's just awesome because he's just good at everything. So he would, really try. He'd do whatever he wanted. He's cool with taking criticism, right? He's been coached his whole life hard. But when that rumor came out, people were like, well, what about Tom? Are we sure Tom's not playing in 2023? Because I'm not. He's single now. I think I saw a story the other day. He's done dating models. Tom Brady, no more dating models. I was like, yeah, Tom, first class, good looking problems. But I feel like it is not going to go quietly. And all it would take is someone to get hurt in OTAs at a big time team. And there's one team, the Miami Dolphins, that I don't think you could ever discount. And maybe this is something that flies a little under the radar in the spring because, for example, the Dolphins, Tua's not getting a concussion in spring. What about the fall? What about in training camp? What if one guy trips on him and he hits his head and all of a sudden he's a little wobbly? It feels like until it's over, like the season has started and Tom Brady is not on the team, I don't know if we can discount it. I don't know if we can. And now there are rumors that he's having second thoughts about doing this. And I don't blame him. Now, I understand it's a lot of money. They gave him like $350 million. But Tom Brady's not doing this for the money. Again, $350 million, I don't care how rich you are, is a lot of money to anyone not named like the Waltons or, Bezos or Elon. But $350 million is a lot of money to Tom. But he does not need the money. Like, ultimately, that money is not going to change anything he does. He's been flying private for 20 years. He can buy any home he ever wants to for a long time, right? And maybe he's got some divorce payments. Maybe that's a little tricky. But she's got a lot of coin, too. Though, depending on where you get divorces, as I've been told by divorcees, that it can get complicated fast. And it gets ugly, especially the more money you have, even if they're both earners. But I wonder, there's just going to be, I just don't think this thing's going to go quietly. It never does. It never does. And we always get injuries. Is there a chance that Tom never really wanted to retire? He kind of did it to save his marriage. And then you realize, maybe my marriage isn't worth saving. Maybe I just want to play and we're getting a divorce no matter what. So adios, Giselle. You go with the people keep saying, Middlekauff, you mix up jiu-jitsu and martial arts and taekwondo. It's like, I don't know all the different factions here. But I do know that Giselle's, been running around with her, taekwondo instructor. Not that Tom doesn't even care. He's like, glad. Have a good time, babe. See you later. Godspeed. I'll drop off the kids next Friday. I just don't know if we've seen the last of Tom.